Hello and a very warm welcome to another video from Auto Night. In this video I'll be replacing this coolant flange on this Audi A4 1.8T. Welcome back to another repair video. First of all, what is this? Blue sky. We haven't seen this in a while. Feels like it's been raining forever. So it's a great opportunity to take a day off to do this job on this Audi A4. It's a 1.8T, it's a B7 car. You have seen it before on previous videos. It's here today with a coolant leak. It's losing quite a bit of coolant actually, and it's running down the back close. It's landing on the clutch bell housing area. It's leaking from the coolant flange. I have the part here today. I have antifreeze, various seals, everything I need to do the job. Let's crack on with it. Let's start by removing the engine cover. And now for ease of access, we'll remove the air filter housing. This just pulls off here. These screws are heavily corroded, but they are coming undone. There's not too much to remove to get this air filter housing out. There's the secondary air injection feed pipe here that needs to be removed. We'll come back to that system later because we'll be mentioning that again. And we need to loosen this Jubilee clip and remove this air intake pipe. This connector needs to also be removed. There are a few wiring harnesses that are attached and these simply unclip. The main securing clip is here and there's an insert that has to be removed, like a peg. And once that's removed, it can be disconnected from this mount. It's a rubber mount. The whole assembly can then be lifted out. There is just one more hose that needs to be removed. In order to gain access, there's quite a lot that we need to remove. It might be a bit of a pain to remove these things, but there really is no easy way of getting to it unless we do that. So there is a breather hose here. There's also the secondary air injection system, including the valve which lives under here. All of this needs to be removed along with some wiring harnesses just so we can get down the back here and get clear access to the bolts and the hose connections to the flange. I've now undone these two clips, so there are now just 3 Allen key bolts. They're 5mm Allen key bolts to undo. And once this end comes out as well, there's just a small clip that secures the wiring loom that has to be removed, which you can squeeze together with a pair of long nose pliers, which allows it to be removed rather than breaking it. The pipe is free. We can also remove this upper breather pipe connection from the cam cover, which helps us gain access to the secondary air injection valve, which is right there. Now's probably a good time just to remove this wiring harness here which feeds the coil packs. There's a 10mm bolt which holds the earthing point to the cam cover and just these 4 clips, these connections. Then we can just get that out of the way and it just makes the whole thing a lot easier, and it only takes moments. unfortunately these little clips do break because they're old and brittle. But it's not the end of the world. This wiring harness to the lambda probe just unclips. Next, the secondary air injection pipe is held in with a 5mm Allen key bolt there. There are a couple of 8mm bolts here. I've removed this clip and I've removed this clip. There's also a little tiny clip here to remove. These, I'm not going to lie, these pipes are very hard. They're very difficult to get off. The clips, in some instances, it's easier to cut them off and use a Jubilee clip later. It's going to be very difficult to film this and do the job at the same time due to the effort involved and the time it takes because it's so fiddly. But this gives you a general idea of what needs to happen. And I'll be back in a sec when this is off. And there is also just this other one here, this 5mm Allen key. And then this assembly is loose, with the exception of this clip here that's now holding it. Apologies for the interruption to this video, as there is a ridiculous animal making a noise. I think it's a dog. It could be a cross between a small guinea pig and a dog. What kind of animal makes that noise? It's ridiculous. It's free. That was an absolute cow. There is a small connection here, hose connection here, that has to be unplugged from the secondary air injection valve, which is done. So just an overview, all the pipe work's been removed. We now need to remove this secondary air injection valve, and it's bolted onto the back of the head here. Apparently there's a gasket, well there will be a gasket, a metal gasket I would think, that it's really important we don't lose. In terms of removing this valve, it's held in with 5mm Allen key bolts. They are notoriously difficult to access because there's very little clearance at the back here, so I cannot use a socket and ratchet. I'm having to use a conventional Allen key and just do it by hand. They are quite long bolts. Not going to be able to get a good shot of that because there's just no, I can't even see it. I'm just reaching down there and doing it, but I'll come back to you once it's off. And it's off. Gasket has actually remained in place. I don't think it is a metal one actually, it looks like a fibre gasket. The gasket's still in place, so it's held in with the 3 bolts, and you do need to use a conventional Allen key. Really important you don't drop this down the back, especially if it's the only one you've got. There would be nothing more rage inducing than to drop that and have to wrestle around to find it. You'd definitely need a magnet to get that back. So just a bit of background for anyone who's wondering. Secondary air injection valve. In terms of what this does, when you start the engine on a cold day, there is a system that feeds fresh air through to the catalytic converter during the warm-up phase, which helps warm things up quicker, makes the catalytic converter effective more quickly, which is an emissions control device. So it takes fresh air from the air cleaner. You may remember I said that this pipe will be mentioned again later, but this pipe that I removed, this takes fresh filtered air from the air cleaner. It's then pumped through to this valve, which is controlled. There's a vacuum pickup here which controls its activation. So part of the emission control system, a lot of cars have it. You can sometimes hear the motor whirring away when you first start the car on a cold day, and then you just hear it kind of shut down once it's done its work. I'm now pleased to say that we can finally see the coolant housing, which is way down there. See, focus. Yep, there we go. So that's what we need to remove next. To give this some context, this bolts onto the head like this, and there are 3 things we need to be concerned with. One is a coolant temperature sensor which fits in there. It simply pushes in and then a clip passes through to keep it in place, and there's a seal as well, rubber O-ring. There's a push fit connector here which goes up from underneath, which is a heater hose, and there is also a conventional coolant hose with a clip that comes around from the back here onto that. That's going to be a devil to do because it's a spring clip. I've got the right spring clip release tool, but it is just a case of getting in there. That's going to be the cow to do. And then just 2 bolts that holds it to the cylinder head. And this seal, which looks like it wants to keep coming out, I sense problems with that ahead. But I'll probably put some red rubber grease in there and that'll keep it in place. We certainly don't want that being displaced when you can't really see what's going on behind there, but we won't worry about that quite yet. So the first thing will be to disconnect this connector. I'm going to leave this in place. I'll swap this over once this is off the car. The second thing is going to be this heater connection, which is underneath. I think this is going to be another case of doing it by hand, so I don't think I'm going to be able to show you what's going on there. Coolant pipe is off, and that hose is held in with a spring clip. That's the heater hose. Now moving around to the other side, you can actually see the clip that I need to remove, which is that one there. Focus. That one. In order to get my long arms through there, I'm going to remove this because it will just give me accessibility. I can then reach my arm around the back and do it. And this is only held in here, so it will be quite easy to remove. And as you'll see, I can now get right around here. When it comes to removing the actual flange, there are two initial nuts that have to be removed. The lower one secures this pipe, and the upper one secures this pipe. So you remove the nut initially from here, and then that will allow you to free off this pipe. There are a couple of 6mm Allen key bolts that have to be removed to give the pipe some more movement so you can free it from the stud. So by removing those two bolts, you've now actually given more movement to that pipe, which means it can be lowered down off the stud. See? And that's an oil feed pipe to the turbo. So just to compare the two parts, they both look the same. No concerns there. I just need to transfer over that coolant temperature switch. Can't actually see any cracks in this, which is slightly concerning, because obviously this is the area where the leak was occurring. But sometimes it's this plastic face that actually distorts, with it being a plastic component and the various heat cycles that it goes through over the years. But I'll replace it anyway. Now it's very difficult to get you any decent camera angles of me actually undoing the bolts, but what you've actually got are these two bolts that fix through, that hold this to the head, and then on each of these little studs on here goes another nut which secures those two pipes that I was speaking to you about. Undoing the compressible spring Jubilee clip on here is absolutely awful to do. I ended up leaving it attached and actually removing this and moving it to the side and getting to it in the end. Again, it's just so hard to get it on camera, but you'll manage to do it. The longest part of the job really is dismantling everything and getting everything apart so you can actually see this bit. Once you actually get in there, you can actually get the thing swapped over reasonably quickly once you've got that dreadful clip off. So in terms of transferring over this coolant temperature sensor, there is just a clip here that is removed, and then that can be removed, and it is just a case of swapping over this little O-ring with the replacement that I've got in this little bag here, along with a new clip. Okay, so I just apply a tiny little bit of red rubber grease around there, which is the foulest smelling stuff. A little bit of rubber grease there. I really can't bear the smell of this. Some people might not mind it, but it makes me feel sick. So I'm putting that back on there, covering that up. Don't want to smell that for any longer than necessary. And in terms of this, place that in, and we snap the clip into position which holds it in place like that. So the flange is back in position. I just have to refit this heater hose, which snaps back into position, and the clip goes into place, and just give it a good tug to make sure that it's secured and that the clip has latched. And this has. Let's reposition this bracket over here. Just apply the 10mm nut loosely and then refit these two bolts. These are the 6mm Allen key. Tighten those. And just tighten that nut. All the associated pipes are now back in place and held on with their 10mm lock nuts. All the hoses are connected. Secondary air injection valve is refitted. 3 bolts, 5mm Allen key. Nothing dropped or lost. Now let's refit the wiring to the coil packs. And not forgetting the 10mm earthing point here. And now to refit this pipe. Some of the clips I had to cut off, but fortunately I have a whole stock of different size clips, so I'll be refitting new ones where appropriate. And refit this breather pipe. Bolt here, Allen key bolt here, Allen key bolt here. Don't forget this one that's underneath the wiring harness. Also, this wiring loom here clips back into this pipe here, and the wiring to the lambda probe clips back into that clip there. Everything's secure. So time to manoeuvre the air filter casing into position. Don't forget to refit a new clip, or the old clip if you can reuse it, on that little connection here. This is all part of the evaporative system that takes fuel vapours from the tank and recycles them in a charcoal activated carbon container that normally lives in the wheel arch. And this little valve, ACF valve, pulses under certain conditions and recycles any fumes and feeds them back either into the engine to be burnt, or they are stored in the activated charcoal container until they are taken in by the engine, the intake system, to be burnt, to prevent them from escaping to the atmosphere and releasing hydrocarbons, which is not good for the environment, apparently. So we just need to refit all these connections, which I'll do right now. Reconnect the air intake and tighten up the bolt. Reconnect the airflow meter. Reconnect the fresh air feed, the filtered air feed for the secondary air intake system. Clips in there, and those two clip in there. That plugs into the ACF valve, activated carbon filter valve, and that plugs in right there. So the system is sealed. It's just a final check there. Need to push in the retainer for the air filter body, which keeps that all secure. We now refit this intake pipe. And the air intake hose. I'm yet to find any Audi where this actually fits properly. It's either in at this end or it's in at this end. They never seem to want to stay both. But this end is more important because this stops anything from going into the air filter in terms of water. So that we'll have to do. Everything's now back together with the exception of the engine cover. I now need to refill the system and bleed it through and run this vehicle up and check for leaks. This little thing here is a bleed screw, so we loosen this and this will allow any air to escape from the system. I recently replaced this pipe, and this is what we thought was the problem in terms of the coolant leak, because somebody had wound just some sort of sump plug into this with an old fibre gasket, and it was leaking from there and it was running down, and we thought that was what the leak was, but unfortunately that didn't cure it completely, although it still needed to be done. So this pipe, I changed this a while back, so I'm going to loosen this. Now I'm going to gradually refill the system, run the vehicle up, let the air escape, and we go from there. I use genuine G12 coolant from VW Audi dealer. I know this cooling system has good concentration, so I'm going to use a 50-50 mix. I've put a litre of coolant in and I've got a litre of plain water here. It's starting to come out here through the bleed valve. Just here. And you can just hear that the secondary air injection pump went off, so that system's working well. Still quite a lot of bubbles and air coming out through this valve, so once that settles down and it's just plain coolant, I'll be screwing that back up. Let's turn this crap off. I like my friend, but he does listen to Radio 1, which I can't bear. Okay, so coolant was coming out through the bleed screw. I've now just done that back up. Coolant level seems to have stabilised, and I'm just going to take this out for a short test drive. Well, I'm back from a decent road test and everything seems in order. It ran up to temperature okay. Coolant level seems to have stabilised, but we'll need to recheck that when it's cold. Everything's good. I consider that a success. No sign of any leaks. Time will tell. We'll need to see how that coolant level goes over the next few days. Job done. Well, that's it for another repair video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was useful if you're having similar problems with your Audi VW or any of the 1.8 series engines that have a similar arrangement. I hope the yapping dog rat thing didn't spoil the sound quality too much. Hope to see you again soon on another repair video. Thank you very much and goodbye.